Well, good morning, everybody. I'd like to spend the front end of this forecast video talking about the new long range, and I want to bring you up to speed on some work I saw some of my colleagues do. This particular analysis was done yesterday by Ben Knoll. He's a great Twitter presence, brilliant forecaster, and when I saw him do this, I'm like, I've got to show people that same analysis in case you missed it. So what he did was he looked back from this summer all the way until last couple of days at how this particular El Nino has been controlling the tropics versus the three previous big El Ninos. And this is just brilliant work. So thank you, Ben. I love it. I can't wait to show it to the folks that watch me. Okay, so we're looking at velocity potential. This is basically telling me where the MJO has been. This is telling me what the El Nino has done to redistribute the rising motion in the tropics. And that's what El Ninos do, right? It's a change in the trade winds to redistribute the tropical convection. Now, your biggest and baddest El Nino events shove it as far to the east as possible. And so far, okay, this year, this is where we've had our greatest rising motion. Now watch this. This was 2023. Let me go back to the previous really strong El Nino, and that was back in 2015. Look how much farther to the east and even a bit to the north the convection was versus the suppression over here. We then say, what about 1997? This is kind of the one made famous by Chris Farley, if you remember that SNL skit. All right, look how much farther east it was. And then we go back to 82. That was another big one, still much farther east than this year's. So when we have this discussion about the strength of this El Nino and what it could potentially do this winter, it just needs to be understood that we can't call this one just your typical strong, El Nino event. So I think there have been sub-seasonal factors that have controlled it more than anything else. We've made that case for months, right? So I know a lot of you just follow me day to day, and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about here. But this is where we currently stand with these ocean temperatures. And if you'd like to go back and look at historic ocean temperatures, I'll show you how to do it. You just go to my website, agweather.com. If you come down to the bottom here on the left-hand side, there's sea surface temperatures. You can click on that. It'll take you to the sea surface temperature map. But click on this link up here, NOAA. And what you can do on this particular website is slide down here to this part right down here. It says archive data and images. And go to this one that says coral temp derived coral bleach. Okay, so click on that. Click on SST anomaly. Go from tropics to the globe. And then you can pick any year they've got in the database, which goes back in this case to 1985. So if you're curious, the most recent one, 2015, let's change the date over to like the current date, which would be, what is today? I don't even know what the date is. I've been traveling so much, my brain hurts. I think it's the 17th, right? Let's click view, and there you go. So that was our most recent big El Nino event in 15, and just for comparison's sake, that's what you've got. So you can see there's a lot of differences between this, especially in the Indian Ocean, the North Atlantic. So many of these factors are working to kind of, just vie for space in our long-range forecast. Now, certainly we have seen a decent westerly wind burst, which has taken our Southern Oscillation Index back down. That's a very El Nino-like signal in the pattern, but we talked about that happening. What we noticed, though, is that in the forecast, that big westerly wind burst, it doesn't have the kind of legs on it just to last and last and last. And this is the thing I've been waiting to see happen. The MJO is finally moving, okay? So you can see there's our sinking motion, our rising motion's trying to come across the ocean in a couple different places. And when you start to see that kind of behavior and notice that these big westerly wind bursts that we're having now don't continue as we approach December, that goes back to just a little bit different look in this pattern, meaning the MJO, which has just lived here. Every time it's come out, it's come right back to this area, phase 8, phase 1. It may just move on through the Indian Ocean and maybe give us a weak signal over Australia and start to get in a normal progression. Normally, El Nino events hold the MJO kind of hostage, and they keep it right in one phase. And sometimes that's, way out here in the Western Pacific, all the way out to phase 8. And we're actually seeing some MJO movement. Now, I say all of that because we've gone through in these first couple of weeks of November this progression of forecasts. And I'm going to focus from the first two models only on the precipitation, okay? Well, I don't know. I'll show you the European temperature as well. But you've seen this from me before, right? I made a case. I'm like, okay, if we're dry here and we're drier there and wet south, wet, not only southwest, but southeast, and maybe in the central United States, that's a classic El Nino pattern. And the European model's temperature forecast, looks something more mild north, cooler to the south. And then we saw the National Multi-Model Ensemble show up this past week, and it's also wet in California and wet in the south, but doesn't have the stronger dry bias in the Ohio River Valley. And it pushed the drier conditions farther to the north up into British Columbia. Now remember, the NMME was one of our best performing models predicting summer drought issues right in through here. It's one of the only models that saw that, and also on the coast over here in the Willamette Valley. So I've given the NMME some credit here for its quality forecast. The two new things that showed up was that this model, this suite of models in the NMME, was statistically processed by the Columbia University group. The IRI multi-model probability forecast was released yesterday. And now what we can see here is its global forecast for December, January, February. Now take note of a couple of things. Notice that it's keeping the driest conditions over the Amazon, not anchoring that over main growing regions in Brazil, making it wet in southern Brazil and Argentina. Normally, El Nino events are dry, really east-based dry in Australia. Not this year. You can see it's more west-based. We see a lot of wet conditions throughout major parts of Asia, and we don't see a strong signal one way or the other in Europe. If we focus in, though, on North America, look at this. They have taken out the risk of being very dry in a few very important areas that most models have kept it in, which means they don't have a strong statistical evidence based on the model output of these regions being dry. So does this fit my narrative? Yeah, it does. And so therefore, when I look at it, I'm like, okay, yeah, it makes sense to me. But I will tell you now that we haven't even started winter. And there are so many subseasonal things we know nothing about, like the behavior of the North Atlantic Oscillation, the ridging or potential blocking in the Arctic, which we'll observe with the Arctic Oscillation, the behavior in the East Pacific versus the West, what the polar vortex is going to do. All of those things are still yet to be seen. And we take a look at this temperature forecast and the mild, the chance for being more mild west with cold here. That's a really interesting signal, because all you've heard about this winter so far is how mild it's going to be. And the NMME did not come back with that mild outlook. I know a lot of you are paying close attention to Europe's temperatures as well. And there has been overall, for the forecast for this winter, a more mild outlook for winter for Europe too. But I'm never going to stay settled on this, because I've seen this in the past, models with this warm bias going in, but then missing some of the subseasonal things that really drop cold air. Sometimes it's brief, but sometimes it's extremely intense across these major population centers like Europe or here in the United States. So following all of this, the last piece of this new long-range update just came out from our government. And what they do is, after the IRI does their statistical mapping, they come in and produce their new seasonal updates. So here it is. You're looking at their new forecast. So they're more mild north, near normal in the central U.S. They're quite wet in the same areas, drier Montana, the Canadian Prairie, and then here in the Great Lakes. And I just think that overall, this isn't necessarily going to be interpreted correctly. Now you're saying, what are you talking about? These are probability maps. These are not anomaly maps. Is that clear? So when we look at this, these are the chances of being above average. And you can see the probabilities are listed right down here. So these are often misinterpreted because the colors are so striking. And when we see this, our brains just go very binary with it, right? Okay, super wet, super dry, or hot and cold, right? Don't do that. That's a misinterpretation of what the U.S. government puts out here. There is a big El Nino flavor to this, but I would make an argument that we are probably 45 days away from the peak of this El Nino, and when it begins to let go, I think we get a whole different solution for the second half of winter that'll be dominated by things we don't yet know about. But I wanted to show you this. As I made a case for all week long, we are expecting, once we get into December, primarily based on that MJO movement, a bit of a pattern shift back toward closer to average temperatures in the west, maybe cool at times, and more warmth east. That is what happens if the MJO sweeps itself all the way back around into the Pacific Ocean. I think we're going to get there by mid-December, and that's what will just drive, troughs here and ridges at times there, and just set up the country for more precipitation. I actually like this new December outlook that they just released. In addition to this, they gave us a new seasonal outlook on their drought, and I definitely agree with what they did here, with showing more of an improvement in parts of the Pacific Northwest. This is definitely going to be an area that shows improvement, but I also think the Midwest will be as well. So we'll watch all of those things evolve as this pattern does. And just to bring you back again to the 1 month outlook for December, this is now much more similar to what the European model has said for a while. And so we've had this discussion. This is the newest European December outlook for precipitation. There's a lot of supporting evidence for this, better flow into California. I think the reason why we're drier in the mountains is simply because of the trajectory of troughs in the west. They're expected to dip and not come barreling straight in over top of the Cascades. So there's a lot of ways by which I could see this work, but the failure modes, here's your failure mode. Your failure mode on the Midwest, your failure mode in the West is if El Niño starts to kind of punch outside of its weight class. And if that happens, the flow splits across the West. And then that leaves this whole area high and dry without troughs. It leaves the whole of the Midwest considerably drier, but we still end up getting what's happening down here in the Southeast. That's your failure mode with this pattern in December. And why that's so important is we've got our new drought monitor out. We still have a considerable portion of the country from abnormally dry up to exceptional drought. Despite recent rains, we are still in exceptional drought, of course, in Louisiana and Mississippi. In fact, it has expanded again into more of the Tennessee Valley and the Southeast over toward the Appalachian Mountains. The Southwest is extremely dry. I mean, I got a comment from a guy that I get a chance to chat with. His name's Kevin. You know, they got 1/10 of an inch of rainfall in his area of Arizona, and celebrate it because of how dry things have been here. So this is a key map to watch evolve in the coming days and weeks. And to bring up to speed on things we've been watching, this dryness in the month of November has just led to another massive drop in soil moisture. And what's going on right here with all of these farmers in these two big areas? We have questions: does winter undo this? Does spring undo this? Because we started 2023 with a similar thing: dry subsurface soils. And that made us more vulnerable to the May-June drought that hit in this area. So that's a top question. The other part of it is the Mississippi River, which is almost back down to 9 feet below low stage. So after bottoming out at 12 feet below low stage, recovering to 5 feet below low stage, we've lost another 4 feet out of it, and it's back down here. Now, last year did the same thing. It kind of oscillated up and down before it made a big recovery and then flooded in spring. That's what river systems do. But I want to know if this map is going to change at all as we kind of work our way through the next half of this month and into December. Right now, this part of Missouri is having its driest start to any November that we have on record, going back 131 years. And there's a lot of 125s to 130s in this area, just showing you the extent of these extremely dry conditions that we've got to deal with right now. Now, there is one thing I'm keeping a close eye on. And if you take a look at what these winds are up to at the surface right now, we do have a front that's slicing through the Midwest, but it's this. Remember what we talked about. When we are able to get really cold air to punch its way through the United States and we get the wind through the Tejano Pass down here, it often sets up a more southerly storm track. And one of the things we're going to watch is where this low, or actually a couple of lows, there's two of them in here, will be going over the next several days, and then what's coming in to reinforce it behind it. So this morning, about 5:50 when I was starting this recording, our front is very easy to see. A lot of cold air behind it. In fact, the 24-hour temperature change, again, wildly swinging temperatures here. We can see, some places 20, 25 degrees colder than they were yesterday, and some places here 20 to 25 degrees warmer. This is a pretty impressive front that's coming through. Our all hazards weather map, though, we got some fog south, some fog in the northwest, winter weather advisories out for parts of the Cascades, and some fog in New England. We're going to see today what's going to happen here as the precipitation map starts to evolve over this next week. Because in the last 72 hours, it's primarily been this interesting tropical system that came down and just absolutely flooded out parts of Florida, 2 sections of Florida here, picking up greater than 6 inches of rainfall, some places over 10, and some very strong winds. But we're going to finally see that low that's off the west coast make its move and finally get onshore. By the way, just want to mention the snowfall forecasts have done a pretty good job verifying from some of our models. Talking here about some of the light snow that spread out of Montana in the last couple of days here, and then some of the snow we saw in the Rockies with the wave that snuck through there as well. Okay, the story's still written in the upper levels, so let's spend some time here. As we work our way from Friday into Saturday, this is the low that sat off the coast. It's finally getting absorbed into this trough that's farther to the north, and that one's going to hit the northwest by the time we get into Saturday night and Sunday. This wave, as we've watched all week, is expected to dive pretty far to the south. It's interesting. It does have, take a look at the tilt on this wave. Whenever you have a tilt that looks like a forward slash, we call that positive tilt. These are waves that dig. And so this one's going to dig a bit farther to the south as well, and it's going to displace this low pretty far to the south. By the way, if you're curious, on Monday, this is when we thought we'd have the omega block. Remember that forecast? It's not there. There's a high over low, but no omega block setting up. Playing this forward into Tuesday and Wednesday, this is the reinforcing trough that comes in to support the cold air on Thanksgiving. There's actually an interesting little storm system coming through with that as well. I'll show you. And then getting out there to next Friday and Saturday, the most kind of interesting thing that evolved was a little wave snuck over the top of this and has a lot of cold air support with it by the time we get into next Thursday, Friday, Saturday that shows up here. And in the meantime, I didn't mean to ignore this, but there's going to be an important system that rolls up the East Coast as well. We then get out there to the last week of November, and this pattern has evolved such that I still think there's going to be a subtropical component to the flow, despite the curvature here, suggesting some convergence in this area for week 2, meaning drier. That's what's really happening in the atmosphere. Okay, so let's pick it up here with the high-res NAM. I was kind of jumping a little bit ahead. Let's go back to this morning. We're going to watch our frontal boundary slice through the entirety here of the New England back down into the Appalachian Mountains. It's what's keeping what's left of that tropical system offshore. And then that leaves later today with some snow on the backside. There's also some snow in Ontario. By the time we get into tomorrow morning, we're watching the low come into the west coast, a bit more kind of robust movement of that low finally. Better rains down here for Kevin. So if you're watching, bud, yeah, we've got some better chances of some showers in your area. And we play this into Saturday. I'm just going to park it out here about Saturday midday, or into Sunday a little bit. So Saturday midday into Sunday morning. And that's when we're starting to see one part of this system emerge into the plains. But take a look at the snow we are expecting in the Cascades. This is the big wave that's helping to kick out the low that was off of California's coast. So this is all getting through here finally. All right, as we've been doing, I'm going to go through a progression of maps that has followed everything I've done all week, so you can see the transition with me here. So we've already played the GFS and the European solution. We've seen it in the NAM. It's a pretty good agreement. And let's pick up right when that wave comes out here on midday Sunday. So the deeper trough has moved into the west. This is what's added the snow, brought in some colder air, bringing in some precip to the west, which is needed. And then we're going to see this system try to take shape by Monday afternoon and evening in the Midwest here. And as we go from Monday into Tuesday, I think the most significant shift I saw was enough cold air kind of coming into this backside on these very strong winds. Remember, we talked about that yesterday, that we've got a little bit better chance for getting some snow. The GFS a little deeper in the position of that snow by Monday night into Tuesday midday in the upper Midwest. This is the low that then curls up. It's a big one, curling up east. And maybe some of you will give me some credit for this one and say, hey, maybe that's one of your two big systems. It's a bit farther to the east than we projected, but there is a system there. And notice the GFS is like, just put down the snow on the backside of this. Even some snow showers all the way down through Iowa, maybe a little bit into Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio. Europeans not so keen on it, but it is keen on the very windy conditions. So when you get into your Wednesday here, this is when the cold air arrives. The European, oddly enough, kicks the system out faster than the GFS. Usually it's the GFS that's more progressive, but they're both there in the system, which is what we want to be watching. So that curls up over the Hudson Bay, and then we follow it with another wave that comes in the northwest and gets over the Rocky Mountains by Friday, the day after Thanksgiving. So that one potentially spreads, look at that, getting out through next Saturday, comes in here and spreads the risk of some wintry precipitation and better rains farther to the south. I like the fact that our models all week long have had similar outlooks, even going out there to 8-9 day forecasts. So let's go ahead and add it up. This is the Europeans' total precipitation through the next 7 days. And that's what we've got. This same dry corridor in through here, drier to the south, drier in parts of the southwest. The GFS, that's its 7 day forecast. I think the bigger difference is the GFS went to be the wetter model with that low. And you say, why? Slower. It just slowed it down. So European is wetter here. The GFS is wetter right over the Great Lakes, where it slows the low down. Now, on the snow side of it, we're going to play these both out. There's the European model. Let's take you back here. And Monday into Tuesday and Wednesday, let's park it out there a week. Look at that snow through there. and some of the snow in the Rockies. A little bit in the Cascades and Sierra Nevada. I say a little bit. I mean, they could get over a foot, but that's nothing for these mountain chains this time of year. And this is what the GFS does. Now, remember how much slower it is with the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday system? Look at that. That's going to be a story to watch. So this is 1 week out in the Euro, 1 week out in the GFS. Euro, GFS. Now watch. The GFS then, with that system next Friday, Saturday, my kids are getting a little excited about it. We live right here, okay? So this is they're rooting for the GFS right now. And what's great about it is the Europeans got something in there too. It's lower on the snowfall totals, but there's a second system coming out next Friday, Saturday, right in this area. That's going to put some snow in the Rockies and sneak out here into the plains. And we've seen it now in a couple of model runs. And it could continue into New England. So I think there's something to watch after Thanksgiving. There's going to be plenty of cold air. So what are the chances of that snow? Well, I went to the Euro probability maps. The chance of getting an inch has been increased in this area. But the heavier snows, we're going to confine those mostly to the Rockies, the Cascades, and then this whole section of Ontario and Quebec with a bit into the Great Lakes as well and parts of New England. That's where your heavy snow quarter is going to be. Week 2, again, what's changed is kind of the depth and elongation of this trough in the models. And while that is overall a bit of a drier look for most of the country, I don't think it's as, I'd say this, it's not as intimidating to me on its longevity, if that's the right phrase. I don't know. I haven't gone to bed yet from yesterday. So I look at this and just say, I expect this to start to change in a big way as we go forward. The other big change for a lot of folks is going to be the temperature. And all week long, our frost probability map has just continued to drop farther and farther south with the frost risk. And a lot of that's coming with the big shot at colder air that's going to arrive next week. So here's today's highs compared to average, getting into tomorrow, and then into Sunday, and Monday. Now, already on Monday, we're going to be watching the transition for this pattern. Look at that. That's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So these are highs on Thursday, struggling to get out of the, out of the 30s in the Midwest, 20s in the Northern Plains. The West is more mild for Thanksgiving. We've got some pretty cold air here making its way all the way to the Gulf Coast. And what we've talked about a lot is, the transition from this now over the next 5 days to this, day 5 through 10, which of course takes us through Thanksgiving and that weekend. And then we watch that cold air move east. Now the question is, as we start December, is that kind of the end of this look? Some of the longer range models suggest we're going to flip-flop this. We're going to bring it right back to a big shot at colder air west, a big ridge east once we get into that first full week of December. But we've got quite a bit of time before we get there, so I got a few things to be watching as we let the pattern evolve. Okay, the last thing I'd like to cover today would be South America, and I was looking at some satellite imagery from yesterday. A couple things I noticed here. Take a look at all the wildfire smoke coming out of the Amazon. Now, when you get in here and look at some of this, I just want to be very careful. These are wildfires that are due to this drought. This is not someone up here burning into the forest to make new farmland. Okay, this is deep into the rainforest here. There's the river right underneath it. There was some isolated convection yesterday, but that smoke got pulled pretty far into the south where we had another day of 105 to 110 here. One thing I did notice as the front is coming through to clear things out, you can get a look at the Paraná River. So if I put some place labels on this, you can now see here's Uruguay, Entre Rios, so Santa Fe is right on the river, and you can see coming out through Rosario, and then eventually here into Buenos Aires, this large area of discharge. See it? This is a lot of flooding on the Paraná River. Coincidentally, it is drier. You get over toward Cordoba, parts of Santa Fe, getting down here into Buenos Aires province. I mean, we've got a lot of areas in through here that even though the river's flooding, it's all been due to upstream heavy rainfall, in this area. And as we look at the forecast, it's another scorcher today. So you can see we're going to have temperatures over 40 C, probably up to about 45 degrees Celsius today, which indicates temperatures approaching 110. We have that again tomorrow. We've got this as we try to work our way into the weekend. This would be Sunday. But then if you notice into early next week, I'll just keep playing this out. That heat starts to just kind of shrink a bit in its size. And the cold front sweeps through, and it's the thing that's going to be bringing in some precipitation. So the newest European run looks something like this. And there's rainfall coming in this 10-day forecast. So this is going to be providing some relief to this long-standing drought and more flooding problems down in southern Brazil. That's been our story all along. But as I mentioned, Getting out there to day 10 through 15, we start to see the models going back over drier in this area and keeping it wet down south. So that will be what needs to be watched as we go forward. And I think it's important to take South America week by week right now. There is some relief coming in the heat in the form of this front. Better rain is expected to come through as well. But did we really undo the major things that were controlling this pattern? And one of the big problems is still the dry air over the Amazon. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to tell you all have a great weekend, and I look forward to talking to you again on Monday. Thanks.